Okay, delegates, if we could take our places and come to order. Thank you, delegates. If you take your seats and settle down.
It was meant to be Tony, but he can't make it. What? So it was meant to be Tony, but he can't make it, so I asked Gordon if he could.
We will carry on with the motions where we left off, but first we have a video address to Congress. The video address is from Shavana Taj, the General Secretary of the Wales TUC. She's the Wales TUC's first BME General Secretary. She joined Wales TUC in February 2019 from the Public and Commercial Services Union, where she'd been the Welsh Secretary since 2013.
Hello, comrades. It's a privilege to address the Scottish Trade Union Congress, and I send solidarity and best wishes from the Wales TUC. We are sister organisations, not just because we bring together hundreds of thousands of workers through our affiliated unions, but also as advocates for the rights, dignity and fair treatment of workers across our nations. In these challenging times, the importance of our collective voice has never actually been any clearer. From the relentless pursuit of profit over people to the erosion of workers' rights and the widening gap between the many and the 1%, it's hard to remember a time when we've not been fighting a hostile UK government. And the minimum service levels legislation is yet just another example of this. And while record numbers of people are continuing to live in abject poverty, UK Tory ministers have prioritised undermining the hard-won gains of workers. So, like many, a general election cannot come soon enough because workers need that new deal. As trade unionists, of course, we know that we have that responsibility, not only to our members, but to all workers, regardless of who they are or where they come from. We must be absolutely unwavering in our dedication to building a more just and an equitable society where the rights and freedoms of all are upheld and protected. And in Wales, of course, have faced our fair share of challenges, whether that's from the decline of traditional industries to the ongoing impact of austerity measures imposed by successive governments. But through all of this, we have remained absolutely resilient and strong and drawn that strength from our collective unity and our unwavering commitment to our values as a trade union movement. But now more than ever, we have got to harness that same spirit of solidarity and that resilience as we confront the massive challenges that lie ahead of us. So whether that's fighting for fair wages, whether that's fighting for better working conditions or protecting our steel industry, we've got to stand shoulder to shoulder, united in our pursuit for a better and brighter future for all. But our work does not end here. As trade unionists, we know that we must continue to be proactive in shaping the future that we want to see become a reality for the many. That means advocating for policies that prioritise workers' rights and well-being and holding those in power accountable for their actions, regardless of the shade of government. This year, the Wales TUC is going to be marking half a century of working as one movement, and we look forward to welcoming our STUC comrades to our Congress next month. So we are absolutely clear that we are very proud as trade unionists. We are proud of our relationships that we have with our sisters and brothers across the whole of the movement. We are very clear that we are united in our determination to build that world where every worker is treated with dignity and the respect that they absolutely deserve. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Shabana. We will now go back to our agenda, to the motions not previously taken, and to our emergency motion, and we'll kick off where we left off at lunchtime, and I'll call on motion 64, a music export office for Scotland, to be moved by the Musicians' Union.
Good afternoon, Congress. Ben Lunn speaking on behalf of the Musicians' Union. Apologies for my awkward timing previously. You'd think a musician would be better at such things like timing. So, within this motion, we are, as a collection of workers, we are a travelling collection of workers. As a personal example, in the past 2 months, I have done work in South Korea, in Ireland, south of England, and around Scotland. And that has only been in the past 2 months, and that is a very difficult task physically, just to sit on a 14-hour flight to go do work in a foreign country, to then come back and all the other kinds of stuff. But on top of that, there comes a lot of extra difficulties to be able to carry out such work. For example, when I went to Korea, I had to fill out a 20-page document for the visa. And on that 20-page document, I had to list every single place I had been to in the past 5 years that was outside of the United Kingdom. That was an extra 2 pages of stuff I had to put down because of all the various different travelling I did, and had to list all of those different parts on top of it. And on top of that, for musicians across the board, since Brexit, the ability to just hop on a plane down to Amsterdam or wherever is significantly harder, because there are new rules and all these other kinds of things which are very difficult to navigate and to make sense of. On top of that, just for musicians who are wanting to build their careers, move themselves further upwards, opportunities are becoming harder and much more difficult to get themselves out and about. And annoyingly, within our industry, it is very much about who you know more than necessarily about the talent. What an export office would be doing for us is it would allow our members to have a body that can help them, say, with practical things around like getting the right visas. Do you need to have these particular things in place if you want to sell merchandise? Are there any particular rules you need to be aware of, say if you're performing somewhere in the Middle East, say solidarity stuff with Palestine? All those cultural things could be then given and advised on that front. Similarly, it could be about actually promoting Scottish art outwards, because one of the big problems we have within the industry, because it is about who you know, not what you are doing as a talent, a lot of it ends up being centred around the rich, the wealthy, the well-connected. And ultimately, if we want Scottish art to be celebrated for the wonderful thing that it is, we need to be putting things in place to make sure Scottish art can get out of Scotland and not just be a beautiful secret we keep here. So, in short, support the motion. If you believe in Scottish art, make sure we get an export office to make sure that we can get our art out to the rest of the world so they can enjoy our lovely tunes and our lovely art and music and so on. So support the motion. Thank you very much, Congress.
Thanks, Ben. The scheduling was down to us, not down to you guys. I can see no other speaker, so I will ask for a formal seconder. Thank you. We will now move to the vote on motion 64, a music export office for Scotland. Can I see all those in favour? Any against? No. Any abstentions? No. Unanimous. That is carried. We now move to our next motion, motion 66, volunteering creative industries, to be moved by Prospect.
Hello, Congress. Mike Collier-Prickett for the Beck2 sector of Prospect Union. Volunteering within the creative industries can offer advantages to both organisations and volunteers. However, it is essential to acknowledge that unpaid volunteers should not be assigned to critical operational roles, particularly those related to safety or as substitutes for paid positions. Regrettably, though, throughout the creative sector in Scotland, including at our own world-famous Fringe Festival, music festivals and other events, volunteers are frequently placed in roles of significant responsibility without proper training or compensation. This not only goes against the aims of the Fair Work Framework and is unfair on the volunteers themselves, but also poses inherent risks to the integrity and safety of our events and performances. Furthermore, the practice of using unpaid volunteering as a means to gain entry to the industry is deeply concerning. This perpetuates the unjust that access to the arts is contingent on individuals' ability to work for free and reinforces barriers that hinder diversity within the industry, further widening the gap of inequality within our society. So I ask for your support in this motion to request that the General Council advocate for stricter conditions on public funding within the creative industry. Our aim is to ensure appropriate deployment of volunteers and to prevent exploitation. Additionally, we must call upon the Scottish Government to uphold its Fair Work First policies, requiring public funded organisations to adhere to fair work policies. Furthermore, we must ensure that arts funding bodies such as Creative Scotland, Event Scotland and Screen Scotland uphold these standards in their funding allocations to arts organisations. In conclusion, let us come together to advocate for a creative sector that is inclusive, equitable and sustainable for all. Together, we can strive to create an environment where creativity and talent can thrive irrespective of an individual's background and socio-economic status. Thank you. I move.
Thank you, delegates. I see no further speakers, so I ask for a formal seconder. Thank you very much for that. We move to the vote. Motion 66, volunteering, creative industries. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. All those against? And any abstentions? I think that's unanimous as well. We move on to motion 89, improving representation of black workers, to be moved by the STUC Annual Black Workers Conference.
Conference President Raza Sadiq, STUC Black Workers Chair. Moving motion 89, improving representation of black workers. Motion is to secure and sustain the legacy of black workers in 2024 and beyond. Survey found lack of trust, members facing racism and not reporting. 1 in 10 are aware of union activities, networks, and race discrimination protocol. 4 in 1, they feel they have a voice, while equal numbers, they experience racism. Survey revealed some black members do not associate with terminology black, suggest a disconnect. Language is important. It shapes, defines, and enables, or perhaps sometimes await accountability. We must recognize the efforts of all or diverse communities who might not identify as black. The 3-part series recently aired on Defines, Fighting the Far Right, showcased the racism faced by the South Asian community. Representation matters. Their voices have been hidden and silenced. As activists, we stand on their shoulders. The survey results presented in the motion highlight stark contrast between the bold statements on social justice, equality, and inclusion found on every union's mission statement, and the daily reality of racism faced by many black members within the workplace. It is evident that despite the good intention expressed in the statements, unions have yet to achieve meaningful actions on racial equality. Racism continues to be pervasive, issues that black members confront on a daily basis, underscoring the urgent need for the unions to move beyond rhetoric and take concrete steps towards addressing systemic barriers. Unions to shift its focus from mere stating intent and address the root causes. I urge all the unions to engage in critical conversation within their unions, challenge existing norms and practice, and actively to shift paradigm to create positive impact on racial equity. By taking bold and decisive action to address racism, promote racial equity, unions can truly live to their mission statement. Let's walk the equality talk together. I will support this motion, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Looking for a seconder. Seconder, come forward, please.
Nizat Uthmani, EIS. I am seconding this motion. Congress, the history of Great Britain and Scotland is and forever will be entwined with the history of black and brown people in our communities because of our history of empire and colonialism. Motions about combating racism come and go every year, but out there, it seems things are actually going backwards. The fight for anti-racism today needs to shake up the roots of our entire system, but we cannot understand institutional racism without understanding its actual history. This motion is asking for better representation of black workers in the trade union movement, but in order to do that, we need to value where we've come from and how. Our schools are obsessed with the civil rights movement in America, yet we teach nothing about the movement in the UK. Children know all about Rosa Parks, but know nothing about Roy Hackett and the Bristol bus boycott. The laws on racial equality that we build our motions on are due to the relentless determination and persistent sacrifice of black and brown communities in the generations before us. People like Anwar Ditta in the 1960s, who won the right for her children to join her in the UK and persistently campaigned to highlight racist immigration laws. Organisations like the Black Parents Movement, who fought to highlight and bring about the end of the disgusting practice of placing black and brown children into schools for the educationally subnormal, a system to segregate these communities out of mainstream schooling up until the 1980s. Lastly, Jayaban Desai, a sari-clad activist in the 1970s, led an epic strike against factory owners who were forcing black workers into unpaid overtime. She said, "Here you are running a zoo. In a zoo, there are many types of animals. Some are monkeys who dance on your fingertips. Others are lions who can bite your head off. We are those lions. Please support this motion."
Thank you, Delegate. I can see no further speakers, so we will move to the vote on motion 89, improving representation of black workers. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Can I see all those against? Thank you. And can I see any abstentions? That motion's carried unanimously. We now move to motion 88, trade unions must practice what they preach on equalities, to be moved by Aberdeen Trade Union Council.
Catherine Kennedy, President, Congress, moving 88 on behalf of STUC. That we call it reminders. We don't need to congratulate yourself. We done it. Wait a minute. When do we publish our findings to prove we done it? Or are we really just talking about it? Are we doing it? In ETUC, we've been going over 150 years, and we look back and we have only had two presidents, a woman, and not only that, we only had two disabled presidents in that time. We know we must improve, and we must be seen to improve. We must publish our findings annually and objectively. We must improve. Trade unions, trade council, it's time to get your house in order. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Kathleen. Do we have a seconder?
President, Congress, Fiona Hart, the Fire Brigade Union, second in motion 88. Congress, as Aberdeen Trade Union Council highlights in this motion, it's so important that trade unions practice what they preach and ensure that within our trade union movement, equalities are not just upheld, but are at the core of everything we do. As a union, we assert that the Fire Brigade Union stands for equality in the wider world, in the Fire and Rescue Service and in our movement. However, we see the Executive Council in our union made up of 1 woman and 12 men, with only 2 from a black minority ethnic background. There persists a challenge within our profession in relation to the ratio of women to men, and an even bigger challenge of BME. The police and army have made better progress, but the fire and rescue services are way behind, with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service having only 6% women whole-time firefighters and under 1% BME, with no available data for LGBT+. The FBU work is, at least in part, about fighting for equality, but the legitimacy of this fight is undermined if the FBU's own house is not in order. Following some high-profile and distressing events within the FBU, we commissioned our own research to see the extent of sexual harassment in the structures of the union, and the results made uncomfortable reading. It takes real leadership to open up your union to independent scrutiny, and the FBU are not shying away from that. It doesn't matter if you're a trade union or an employer, we support all those within our movement who are challenging sexual harassment and bullying. Our underrepresented members need to know we listen and take action to support them, wherever and wherever that may be. If women can't know that they are safe, both physically and psychologically, from within the environments of the trade union movement, how can we expect them to want to take on roles any level, let alone the public-facing exposure of senior positions within our unions? The FBU fully supports this motion that trade unions must practice what they preach on equalities, because undermining equality undermines our movement. I second.
Thank you, Delegate. Next speaker, please.
President, Congress, Grant Butters, UCU, speaking in support of motion 88. I think it's incredibly important to recognise that as individual unions and as a movement, we are far from perfect. The rhetoric is too often not backed up by reality. I echo the words of our President, who rightly and forcibly pointed out in his address on Monday, we need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. I think it's important, before I go further, to acknowledge what's happened in my own union, and which many of you will already be aware of. Serious concerns raised by both our staff branch of Unite and our Black Member Standing Committee spilled into the media when internal routes to resolution failed. This is something we must take incredibly seriously. I and many other members of our National Executive are active in trying to address the issues raised, and at our recent Scotland Congress we also passed a motion in support of those who have spoken out, recognising that we need action, not just more words. I mention this here because I think it's vital that when such issues are raised, it's important that we don't fudge, duck or sidestep them. But I also want to pose the question, why does it take a crisis to get us to talk about this? I think this motion addresses this. Our unions need to be exemplary workplaces, and this must be mirrored in everything we do as a union and a movement. Understanding how we do this requires information and an understanding of what we are, what we do and how we do it, not as an alternative to action, but as a toolkit for that action. So I encourage you to support this motion, but that's not all. I want you to take the message behind it back to your branches, to your committees and wherever else you operate. Let's start walking that walk. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Another speaker.
President, Congress, Kirsty Reichley, speaking on behalf of the STUC LGBT plus Workers' Conference. First of all, we support this motion, and I just want to take a slightly different tack on it as well. I think having equality groups is a fantastic thing. Speaking as a member of one of those equality groups, excellent. What I would like to say to those people like myself, that are sectioned into the equality status. Get yourself out there. Get yourself involved in other aspects of the union. It's not just sitting in, oh well, I identify as, therefore I'm in here. It's about getting involved in the entire business of the union. So that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to encourage everybody to get involved in every aspect of the union. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I see no further speakers, so we will now move to the vote on motion 88. Trade unions must practice what they preach on equalities. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against? Can I see any abstentions? I think that's unanimous. Thank you, Delegate. Sorry, I've been told it wasn't. My eyesight's not what it was. We now have motion 87, Scotland demands better, to be moved by Dundee Trade Union Council.
Thanks, President. Stuart Fairweather, Dundee Trades Council, move in motion 87, Scotland deserves better. Congress, I hope each and every one of you have enjoyed your time in Dundee. It's important to say that this city has 40,000 of its citizens in poverty, according to the Scottish Government statistics. It's an enduring legacy and inequality, one not unique to Dundee, but one that we focus on. Dundee Trade Union Council, along with affiliates, regularly is in the square, taking deputations to the council about cuts to the City Council, cuts to the Leisure Trust, cuts to the Health Service, cuts to the Fire Service, cuts to every and other aspect of our society. Again, we're no unique in that regard. It'll be familiar to trade unionists across Scotland. Congress, let's be clear. Cuts are a theft against our class. Our General Secretary said loud and clear that strike action has seen a gain of £4 billion and more to the pockets of workers in Scotland. But what we need to do is make action that's more than about defence. We need to resist the cuts, and we need to do that in defence of working people, of the planet, and of our communities. Scotland demands better needs to be about, yes, wages, yes, conditions, but it also needs to be about challenging neoliberal orthodoxy. What's neoliberal orthodoxy? I'm sure you can just as well as me. It's that notion within our political class that putting profit before people is the way to go. Putting profit before planet is the way to go. We need to move beyond that. Congress, there's been a spectre, I guess, haunting this conference. It's the one of the forthcoming general election. And as we move towards that general election, we should do three things. We should believe that the ideas that have been generated in this hall are the best manifesto for any political party going forward in that general election. And we should call on our General Council, the incoming General Council, to build alliances with civil society to construct an agenda for hope, one that emanates from the ideas in this hall. And lastly, we should strive to ensure that the strike action that's taken by our members has an immediate benefit, but has a lasting benefit by challenging those that would preach neoliberalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have a seconder? Nobody coming forward to second. We will then move on to, formally seconded, of course. Thank you, formally seconded. Can I see those in favour? Can I see those against? Can I see any abstentions? I think pretty sure that one was unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to motion 103, support banning conversion therapy in Scotland, to be moved by the STUC annual LGBT plus workers conference.
Congress President Thomas Granger, LGBT Workers Committee, moving motion 103, banning conversion therapy and practices in Scotland. Currently, there is no universal definition of the term conversion therapy or practices. The Scottish Government's expert advisory group on ending conversion practices define this as any treatment, practice or effort that aims to change, suppress and or eliminate a person's sex, sexual orientation, gender ID or gender expression. The stats for this are in the most very thin on the ground, or at best are only a fraction of the problem, as they rely on self-reporting. I do have some stats which I can share with anyone later. I'd like to share a personal testimony with you from a gay man in his 20s. Today, I struggle with trauma, PTSD, and an eating disorder, which are all linked to my conversion therapy experience. I have a difficult time with relationships, and intimacy scares me. A lot of people can't comprehend what it's like to have experiences like mine, even LGBT plus people. My parents still don't understand why it is so damaging. They think all therapy is a good thing. 65% of the Scottish population think a ban is definitely required. 15% think these therapies and practices should carry on, and 20% are unsure. 65% of our population think this is damaging and should be banned. A 2018 study found that LGBT plus youth who had undergone conversion therapy were more than twice as likely to report having attempted suicide multiple times following the experience. This is unacceptable and in some cases barbaric. This motion asks Congress to support a ban and put it back on the Scottish Government's foremost agenda, we hope sooner rather than later. Congress, please support.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have a speaker to second? Oh, we'll ask for formal seconder. Thank you. Can we move to the vote, please? Motion 103, support banning conversion therapy in Scotland. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see any against? Any abstentions? That motion is carried. Thank you. 94, we call on motion 94, accessible cities, to be moved by community.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Conference. Robert Mooney, moving motion 94, accessible cities. In the 21st century, I think most of us would expect that with advances in technology, that things would get easier for everybody, but unfortunately, that's the complete opposite for people who are blind and disabled in Glasgow City at the moment. They've built cycle lanes all over the city, and I'm not against cycle lanes. I think there's an absolute need for cycle lanes, but they've built them in a way to make it a little bit safer for cyclists, but at the expense of being extremely unsafe for blind people. A blind person has to cross a cycle lane in Glasgow now to get to a bus stop, or he has to cross a cycle lane to then get to a set of lights, traffic lights to then cross the road. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that a blind person who can't see bikes and can't hear bikes, it's going to be a real danger. So as a society, when did we decide that the safety of able-bodied, fully sighted people comes at the expense of the unsafety for people with disabilities? In Glasgow City, there's 100 traffic lights that are inaccessible to blind people. Everybody knows that the box that you press the button at the traffic light for the green man to come on, there's actually a cone at the bottom of that turns when the green man comes on. A blind person feels it, and that lets the blind person know the green man's on. There's 100 sets of traffic lights in Glasgow that don't have that. And people automatically say, but traffic lights have got audible signals, but they don't, because if you're at a junction with two roads crossing each other, you can't have an audible signal because a blind person will think the audible signals go off in the road he's on, and he'll cross and walk right into a bus, when in fact it's the signal's coming for the other road, so they don't have audible signals. So there's no way a blind person knows that green man's on. So if you would humour me, shut your eyes for 2 seconds. Imagine you're standing at a curb, you've got the day-to-day noises going on, like digging roads, the rain, or Bob the busker is playing Sweet Caroline at 150 decibels, and you're in total darkness, and you've got to think to yourself, I think it's clear, and just step out onto that road. How many people in this room would actually be willing to do that? But blind people need to do that every single day in Glasgow City. It's an absolute disgrace that we're putting blind people's safety at risk. My wife's totally blind. She's one of the most confident and capable people I know, regardless of her disability. But I've seen her phoning me for the city centre, crying because she can't navigate her way through the city. It's shocking. And it's worse today than it was 20 years ago. And I see that our lights on, so I will not keep you any longer. Community are asking that we encourage the Scottish Government to put legislation in that makes local authorities have to adhere to safety in public realm when it comes to disabled people. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a seconder, please.
Thanks, President. Congress, Tony Snedden, seconding motion 94 on behalf of the Disabled Workers' Conference and also a CWU member. At present, more and more streets in Scotland's biggest cities are being transformed to give priority to active travel. This includes, as Robert says, cycle lanes, notably in Glasgow. However, many disabled people have reported that in Glasgow, the new cycle lanes have made getting around considerably more difficult for them. Disabled workers were originally consulted with the plans, but as usual, concerns were ignored and plans went ahead that are having a detrimental effect on many disabled people across the city. A major issue is that some major roads, as Robert says, now require pedestrians to cross cycle lanes to get to bus stops and crossings. This is particularly affecting visually impaired people and is causing havoc on our roads. Leith Walk in Edinburgh has been described as a no-go zone by some campaigners, also for Hearts supporters. The fact is, some councils are simply choosing style over safety. Cycle lanes can be great, fantastic for the environment, and they allow many to get some exercise, while commuting. Many disabled people also enjoy cycling themselves. We are not against active travel, but disabled people must be properly consulted, and most importantly, their views must be listened to and taken on board. Accessibility for all should be an absolute priority. We do not deserve to be an afterthought, nor do we deserve to be outright discriminated against. Congress, I urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I see no further speakers, so we'll move to the vote on motion 94, Accessible Cities. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you. We now move to motion 96, the importance of hyperlocal and local media, to be moved by the NUJ.
Thank you, President. Congress, Simon Barrow, National Union of Journalists, moving motion 96. Conrad Landin, one of our NUJ team at the STUC, who unfortunately cannot be here to move this motion, so I'm sorry you've got me again. But Conrad is one of a large but rapidly decreasing number of people in our trade who owe their career to journalism with local newspapers. Remember them. In his case, the Camden New Journal, which was an independent newspaper born out of a strike which took place when the parent company of its predecessor attempted to shut it down, a story we've heard on numbers of occasions here in Scotland as well. In the 4.5 decades since, while some independent newspapers have thrived, including, of course, the West Highland Free Press here, ownership of Scotland's and the wider UK's local newspapers has become more and more concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer corporations. And since the advent of the internet, the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit circulations and advertising revenue, these corporations have struggled to make money from local papers and have responded by slashing staff, by shutting newsrooms, by closing scores of titles. And for example, you know, in Scotland, there's a whole bunch of local newspapers that rely on just 5 journalists to cover all their news, and increasingly it's becoming journalism between the decreasing number of adverts, that is, reproducing press releases. And this has created news deserts in which local government, police, courts and other institutions receive no effective scrutiny, with potentially fatal consequences for our democracy. The safety failures, for example, which led to an international incident such as the Grenfell Tower fire, were diligently documented by campaigners and local people, but with no local paper to exercise leverage on the council and its tenant management organisation, the concerns were ignored, and we saw what those fatal consequences looked like. In the light of this, the emergence of independent hyper-local titles and the development of the Scottish Beacon, which is a network of community news providers, a membership organisation that brings together lots of small papers, has been a shining signal of hope. And I'd urge you to go to their website, scottishbeacon.com, and see what they're doing. They're helping to grow journalism. It's vital that trade unionists engage and support the Beacon and its partners to increase community engagement with trade unionism and support a model of local journalism which puts communities and workers first. And it's also crucial that we as trade unionists recognise and engage with these small hyper-local news outlets and the opportunity they provide to tell our story, build awareness of our movement and mobilise for change. I move.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have a seconder, please?
Chair, Jim Malone, Dundee TUC, seconded motion 96 by the NUJ. Independent local news providers have never been more required. As an active Dundee-based trade union activist and campaigner, I've personally experienced the biased, and ill-informed non-unionised journalistic output from DC Thomson's. Their publications, in particular editorials, attacking our class and our movement, editorials supporting cuts to our public services and attacking workers and communities opposing them. The NUJ motion highlights the potential of community-based media through the example of Scottish Beacon, empowering a new generation of unionised journalists who will need the support and the engagement with trade councils and with our trade unions and our trades councils. Congress, please support independent media and journalism. Congress, please support.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have a further speaker? Okay, we'll move to the vote on that one. Can we have those in favour on motion 96, the importance of hyperlocal and local media? In favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? That is carried. We now move to Composite R, covering motions 98, 100 and amended motions 99. Adult hunger, the right to food and free school meals, to be moved by East Kilbride and South Lanarkshire Trade Union Council.
President Congress, the statistics and details are in the composite, so I'm not going to focus on them. Rather, I'm going to say a few words about how we've arrived at this sorry pass, where in 2024 we're talking about hungry people in the 6th richest country in the world. And most of my information has come from this book by Professor Danny Dorling, It's called Shattered Nation, Inequality and the Geography of the Failing State. And if you can't get a copy of the book, and I've taken about 70 notes from it, on YouTube you can get Professor Dorling speaking about the book and being questioned about it. It's well worth reading, and I would commend it to those who are particularly doing the cost of living course that the STUC provide, and you know, I'm giving a punt for the cost of living course as well. The Chronicle starts in '79, we don't need to get into the details. It's paused for some by the Major and Blair governments, and it kicks off again with a vengeance in 2008. Congress, in 1970s Britain, you know, everybody knows about the so-called winter of discontent. You had economists and civil servants from the Nordic countries coming to Britain to look at its social model and using its social model to build their social model that we now look upon with envy. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of meeting Anne Pettifer, the economist. Many of you will know Anne Pettifer. And I put the following to her, because it was sort of in Danny's book. Thatcher used the fiscal headroom that she had to conduct class war. Don't have the time to go into the details. And I put the following to her, and she agreed with that, and I put the following proposition to her as well. It appears that Rachel Reeves appears to be saying that the reality of the fiscal headroom that she will inherit if she becomes Chancellor does not exist. And she said, yes, that you could put an argument that that appears to what she's saying, Rachel Reeves is saying at the moment. So, this movement, in this regard, to deal with these issues, has two major jobs as I see it. One is to put pressure on the Scottish Government and Scottish Labour to stop pretending that there are no more fiscal levers within the devolved settlement that can be taken forward. And the other thing is to try and get Rachel Reeves, if she becomes Chancellor, to use that fiscal headroom not to conduct class war against the working class, but to defend the working class. Thank you, Congress.
Thank you, Bill. To be seconded by Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union. Who aren't here, so it's the EIS.
Thanks, President. Paula McEwen, EIS, happy to second this. Colleagues, why are we still having to fight to have our children fed? Why do we still have children in poverty and going hungry? I'm bringing young people's voices to this debate through the Scottish Youth Parliament campaign in 2023, A Young Person's Right to Food. In their report, one young person said, some people can't afford to buy food at lunch or to bring in their own, so they just starve during school hours, which makes students unfocused and angry. So they just starve from the mouths of our babes, colleagues. In that same report, 86% of young people recognised that universal free school meals, and for EIS that means from 3 to 18, is a key way to uphold the UNCRC right to food. 75% would be more likely to eat in school. Almost 50% recognise the stigma that's attached to the current system, and they give strategies to address this. Universal provision and equity of access is one of them. They're the way forward. They know that if a child has a hot, nutritious meal that meets their religious and dietary requirements, it will impact on their health and educational attainment. And it can be done. I work in Inverclyde, the first authority in Scotland to make a cross-party decision to feed their children in primary 1 to primary 7. It's a political choice. The EIS is proud to support the STUC Women's Committee campaign Food for Thought, which is amplified through the wider Scotland Demands Better campaign. We urge you to support this composite. Colleagues, our children should not be hungry in school.
Thank you, Delegate. I have the British Dietetics Association to support.
President, Congress, Vicky Bennett, British Dietetic Association, supporting Composite I. Congress, the BDA is working alongside the NEU with a joint campaign for free school meals, No Child Left Behind. Children are going hungry every day in Scotland, with 1 in 4 living in poverty, which in itself is shocking, and no government should knowingly allow children of any age to go hungry when they have the ability to provide support. No parent should be in a position of making spending choices that include whether or not they can afford to feed their child. No parent should have to go without food in order to provide a meal for a child. The Scottish Government pledged to introduce free school meals for all by 2024. Primary 1 to 5 are currently in receipt of free school meals. The Scottish Government have reneged on their promise and betrayed low-income parents and their families by saying that families can only access free school meals if they're in receipt of a specific benefit. But what about those that are just above this threshold? And this also brings stigmatisation back to the forefront once again. Some councils have opted to ignore the Scottish Government's U-turn and have chosen to fund primary 1 to 7 free school meals out of their current budget. So now we have a postcode lottery across Scotland. How can this be fair? The BDA understands the wider benefits of free school meals and also the connection between improving focus, behaviour and attainment, which all contribute to the health and well-being of our children. It's also evidence that school meals reduce the incidence of childhood obesity as well as improving reading skills. Our children learn together and play together. They should eat together too. It can only be assumed there is some kind of ideological objection amongst the current Scottish Government to prevent childhood hunger, and as I can see no moral or financial argument. Introducing free school meals for all is the best public health policy that could be easily implemented and has the evidence that it will be effective. Please support our campaign and support this composite.
Thank you, Delegate. We have another speaker.
Lorraine Thompson, Unison Scotland, supporting motion 99. Congress, you don't need to be a teacher or a classroom assistant or a nursery worker or an educational psychologist or a dietitian or a doctor to know that hungry children don't learn. But if you do need to ask, that's what the law will tell you, and it isn't complicated. If we as a society can't make sure that all of our children are getting a healthy meal at school every day, then we're failing as a society. Congress, one hungry child is one hungry child too many, and there's far more than just one. Last year, the Trussell Trust gave out nearly 88,000 food parcels specifically for children, and that was a 24% increase on the year before. Over a third of the households using food banks are households with children, and of course it's not just children that are going hungry. Our low-paid workers across Scotland are facing the heating or eating dilemma every day. As the composite says, getting on for 1 in 5 workers across Scotland are frequently facing what is described as food insecurity. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Delegate. I see no further speakers, so we'll move to the vote on Composite R, Adult Hunger, the Right to Food and Free School Meals. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Any abstentions? That motion is carried. We now move to Composite D, Fighting for Offshore Workers, Jobs and Safety, covering motions 14 and 15 to be moved by RMT.
Conference. President. Ricky Kelby from the RMT, moving composite motion D for my union. First time delegate, first time speaker. Thank you. I'm standing before you today to ask your support for composition motion on jobs and safety for offshore workers, our members in the North Sea. I'm very sure that very few amongst you today have ever worked on an oil and gas platform miles out in the North Sea. If you think about just to get to your work, you have to don your survival suit, even the very word survival suit, and climb aboard an ageing helicopter that looks like it's seen better days. That is in fact more daunting than standing here before the STUC conference making my first speech. We all remember the Piper Alford tragedy when 167 souls were lost on the 6th of July 1980 and the findings of the Cullen report. If safety had been given priority over profit, that appalling loss of life would have been prevented, almost definitely. My union is concerned that commercial pressure is again becoming a threat to offshore safety standards. The safety of helicopter transport, for example, is not highlighted enough by industry. To give you some figures, between 2009 and 2016, 33 offshore workers and crew died, and 65 were rescued from the North Sea following accidents in the UK and Norwegian sectors. All these accidents involved the Super Puma helicopter, or as they call it, the flying coffin. The Super Puma has been grounded across the North Sea, quite rightly so, since 2016, but the replacement Sikorsky S-92 is ageing and investment in new models is lacking. And as the industry tries to squeeze every last penny out of the raging fleet, where do we go from here? Airbus is even trying to reintroduce the Super Puma to the offshore sector, something that would poison industrial relations. We need investment in safety of our frontline members and working in some of the most inhospitable working conditions and actual plan for the future. Offshore workers and society's transition to cleaner fuels is a gaping hole in the government policy. A Green New Deal must deliver this. Labour's welcome proposals for mandatory fair pay agreements would make a real difference for offshore workers and provide a firm basis for a transition that protects jobs, livelihoods and skills. We also need to see the Scottish Government's long-delayed energy strategy and just transition plan for the country. RMT surveyed offshore workers last year, finding that pay and conditions, safety and job security were our members' prime concerns. That is unsurprising, but what is surprising and indeed shocking is there is no just transition plan for our members in the offshore oil and gas industry, despite years of talking about transition for offshore workers, all levels of government and internationally. And while offshore workers and their unions fight for a fair future, the oil and gas companies are raking in record profits. In 2022, the 5 biggest, including BP, Shell and Total, made a staggering $134 billion profit. So I'll cut to the chase here. Conference, 80% of oil and gas extracted from the North Sea is exported, and that's up from 60% 20 years ago. The RMT strongly support public ownership in the offshore oil and gas, renewable energy, decommissioning and carbon capture storage under the North Sea. This is key to ensuring a just transition which protects offshore workers and the environment and society. Conference, please support composite motion D. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Balpert, a second.
Good afternoon, President, Congress, first-time delegate, first-time speaker. Balpert is about making every flight a safe flight. I've been a helicopter pilot for 22 years, and I've seen the disparity between the Norwegian sector and the Scottish sector. Pilots put their lives at risk and the lives of their passengers when they were forced to fly in under-resourced safety systems. In February, a Norwegian S-92 helicopter crashed with 6 crew and passengers aboard. The crash happened just 5 miles outside of Bergen. It took almost an hour to rescue the crew and passenger from the sea. This unfortunately led to the death of hypothermia of one of the passengers. Immediately following the accident, Norway was able to mobilise 6 search and rescue helicopters. And indeed, Norway has 3 offshore permanently based search and rescue helicopters in support of the oil and gas industry. Scotland has 1. It is based in Aberdeen. It has the capacity to lift a quarter of what one of the large helicopters lift, and it is not all-weather capable. If we operated the extremes of the range of the aircraft, such as the S-92, it could take 8 to 10 hours to rescue people from the sea in the event of a crash. Please put our people before the profits and support the composite.
Thank you, Delegate. I see no further speakers, so we'll move to the vote. Composite D, fighting for offshore workers' jobs and safety. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. We now go on to amended motion 16, reducing Scotland's skill gaps, and I call on East Kilbride and South Lanarkshire Trade Union Council.
Kenny Wallace, East Kilbride and South Lanarkshire Trades Council, moving motion 16. Scotland has a proud history of producing highly skilled workers in our industries from textile, steel, coal mines, shipbuilding, manufacturing, construction and other sectors. However, we have witnessed a sad decline in our industries and numbers of skilled workers due to the wrecking ball Thatcherite policies of the 1980s, with the closures of Ravenscraig, Caterpillar, coal mines, shipyards and other high-skilled and high-employment density industries. This and other factors has contributed to record numbers of vacancies for skilled workers in manufacturing and construction to this day. A recent construction skills industry paper on the outlook for 2023 to 2027 predicted that due to skills shortages, the construction industry in Scotland would need 19,500 extra workers by 2027. But in reality, we'll face an average decline of 0.1% of workers from an already skills short sector. So how can we bridge this skills gap? By recruiting through apprenticeships. Although naturally picking up after the pandemic, UK-wide there's been a decline of 5,800 apprenticeship starts for 16 to 24-year-olds over the last 10 years. This is a worrying stat. Young workers and apprentices will need to be at the core of our retrofitting programme if we are to achieve our ambitions of net zero within the industry in the immediate future. Apprenticeships are the foundation from where we can retain the needed skills of the past and develop the new skills of the future. With over a third of construction workers being over 35 and the decline of 16 to 24-year-olds taking up apprenticeships, Scotland's increased recruitment in Scotland is vital via apprenticeships. Also impacting the construction craft apprenticeships is the winding down of the Scottish Building Apprenticeship Scheme. After the removal of the requirement for mandatory registration of craft apprentices in 2017, this saw registrations plummet and the decision was taken to remove it altogether. This is despite the Fair Work Convention report in 2022 recommending the recommendation for it to be reinstated. This may lead to apprentices in the construction sector not being protected by collective bargaining on terms of conditions and rates of pay. This is a race to the bottom for workers. Scotland has always been and should always remain the gold standard of apprenticeships, producing highly skilled workers. Apprenticeships are an investment in skills, investment in industries and investment in Scotland. Please support this motion. I move.
Thank you, Delegate. I have the EIS to second.
President, fellow activists, Henry Kilgour, EIS, seconding amended motion 16, reducing the Scotland skills gap. In 2021, the SNP manifesto for Scotland's future stated that they would work with all stakeholders to build an infrastructure that developed the industries of the future and the skills required to make these jobs effective. They also set out a young person's guarantee for all 16 to 24-year-olds to have access to further education, access to apprenticeships, or gaining a permanent job. Prior to the pandemic, the government was on track to meet the original target of providing 30,000 modern apprenticeships for Scotland's future workforce. Despite promises to get back on track and extend where required, that was post-COVID, this has not been achieved. But access to apprenticeships must be based on sound quality assured provision and not based on the cost-cutting or lowering of standards. It's the easiest way to get round that. Further education can offer high-quality provision that could enhance availability and range of apprenticeship courses via links with career services, schools, employers and community groups. To manage this, we must work to increase the number of opportunities in further education sector. Against a background of chronic underfunding, colleges are fighting for their future, yet the FE sector is pivotal in putting into practice the enhancing of the skills of our future workforce. I ask you all to support this motion.
Thank you, Delegate. Supporting speakers?
President, Congress, Grace Hepburn Unison, speaking in support of motion 16. The UK Employer Skills Survey 2022 Scotland report shows that the skills gap in Scotland has indeed increased, and it notes that establishments in education and public administration report the largest gaps, swiftly followed by manufacturing. Colleges Scotland is the representative body for colleges in Scotland, and they tell us in this wee leaflet here that colleges are the biggest delivery agent in modern apprenticeships, supporting over 13,000 students. Yet in April, for the second year running, there was a freeze on starting new modern apprenticeships, while the Scottish Government fumbled about sorting out its budget. Colleges Scotland also tells us in this wee booklet that over 4,000 school pupils have access to foundation apprenticeship through colleges, and 25% of those will go on to take a full-time place. Yet the Scottish Funding Council, who distribute the government funding to colleges, have changed the way that colleges can access the funds for foundation apprenticeships, forcing colleges to slash the number of places available. Colleges are the cornerstone of economic well-being. A report last year by the Fraser Allander Institute states that college graduates will boost the Scottish economy by £52 billion over the course of their working lives. But the sector itself provides equivalent of over 10,000 full-time jobs and supports a further 4,000 plus via their supply chains, and yet it's being decimated. The Scottish Government slashed funding to colleges year on year, and as a result, colleges have been cutting courses and cutting jobs left, right and centre. We have colleges on the verge of bankruptcy. We've got the threat of compulsory redundancies, unheard of in the public sector, but no for colleges, hanging over the heads of our staff, and we've got students left in limbo. And our most rural communities are the ones that have been hit the hardest, with relocating being the only option left to some students.
You finish off now.
Okay. Please support this motion, because Scotland needs skills, but Scotland needs its colleges.
Thank you, Delegate. I see no other speakers on this motion. Amended motion 16, reducing Scotland's skills gap. Going to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Can I see any against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move on to the emergency motions. Emergency motion number 1, supporting migrant workers, to be moved by Dumfries and Galloway Trades Union Council.
John Dennis, Dumfries and Galloway, TUC, moving the emergency motion, which arises out of the sudden upsurge UK-wide of African and Asian care workers attending Citizens Advice Bureau with complaints about their treatment. I've had 6 of these young women come to me as an employment rights advisor in the Dumfries CAB from 3 different care companies, 2 big national companies and 1 local care provider. And if there's 6 coming forward in Dumfries alone, there must be thousands with issues nationwide. I checked online with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, TBIJ, if you want to look it up, who have reported on this in The Guardian previously, and I've got another article in preparation for The Observer. The Home Office offers no protection against exploitation of these workers. If workers complain to them about their treatment, they might remove the employer from the list of sponsors, but they would do nothing at all to help the now unemployed and destitute worker, because they're not entitled to any public funds, to find a new sponsor within the 60 days that they've got before they get deported. Some of the worst abuses of the care workers, you need to go to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism's website, but I can give you examples of the issues that I've come across while preserving anonymity. An example is a fee of £12,000 levied by an agency in Asia to, in inverted commas, find a woman a care job in the UK. Some of the clauses in the employment contracts that they're given are obviously discriminatory. For example, they're offered a salary of £21,801 per year. That's the UK government living wage, whereas the Scottish government is supposed to be paying all care workers in Scotland the real living wage, or the Scottish living wage. I've got an example of a contract here, which I'm happy to share with unions concerned. I found 15 objectionable and challengeable clauses. I'll give you a taste of one or two of them. They have to keep their salary confidential. The Home Office is kept informed if they raise a grievance or are subject to a disciplinary issue. They have no right to a disciplinary hearing, and there's a threat of withdrawal of sponsorship. Employment tribunals haven't any powers to reverse a deportation by the Home Office. So at CABs, we're advising workers to find an alternative sponsor first, then resign, take your ex-employer to employment tribunal, and that's where this motion comes in. We've got to get councils to agree to take over the sponsorship of people who raise issues with their employers.
Finish off now, John.
Easier said than done, and we want you to agree the terms of this motion and take this forward to the Scottish Government and in the election campaign.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have a seconder? We have that seconded formally, please. Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. Emergency Motion 1, supporting migrant workers. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That is carried. Thank you. Now on to Emergency Motion 2, cuts to railway infrastructure, jobs and services in Scotland, to be moved by RMT.
Comrade President and comrades, Gordon Martin, RMT Scotland, moving emergency motion number 2 on railway infrastructure cuts, which once again we're seeing the Scottish Government cutting the budget available on the railway infrastructure. Now, the simple fact is there is not enough money getting spent on rail infrastructure as it stands at the moment, and with climate change, the railway is being adversely affected on a daily basis, an annual basis, and it's only going to get worse. And the real danger is we face another situation like Carmont at Stonehaven just a couple of years ago, where a rail infrastructure failing led to deaths. Now, that is a stark situation. That is a situation nobody wants to be in, but it's a situation that we are now facing with yet another cut this year, or for the control period for this year, for the next 5 years, of at least £315 million, which has led to an immediate problem for us as a union, with Babcock rail workers facing redundancy. And when you speak to the Scottish Government about this as a problem, their answer is, Babcock Rail are a private company, that's nothing to do with the Scottish Government. It's a direct consequence of Scottish Government cutting funding, the Network Rail funding for the 5-year envelope. That's exactly what's led to the immediate problem of redundancies and no doubt the longer term problems of the infrastructure falling apart. Now, that has an effect on the daily train user, because the timetable would be as well getting thrown out the window, because the way they'll mitigate against infrastructure cuts is they'll put on speed restrictions, which means your trains will take longer to get from A to B. Let's hope they get from A to B without going down an embankment and killing people. So that is a situation that we find ourselves in. It's something that we really need to fight against. And I'll finish on this. 10 years ago, a government minister, Fergus Ewan it was, invited me to his house to a meeting with him because he was unwell. 2 weeks ago, the current Transport Secretary declined a meeting with myself and my General Secretary to meet to talk about these very important issues. That shows you the difference in how this Scottish Government now want to treat the trade union movement. They've been in power far too long and they need a rocket up their arse to remind them who put them there. Thanks, Congress. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have a seconder?
Conference. Drew Gilchrist, North Lanarkshire Trades Council, seconding the RMT's motion. The importance to rail to Lanarkshire can't be understated, not just because it creates jobs for the community, but because it's a lifeline of capital investment into the communities. Often it's the only reliable type of transport that many rural communities in Lanarkshire have. Last year, the North Lanarkshire Trades Council brought to conference an emergency motion on the Greek rail disaster. Now, that was a disaster caused by years of austerity imposed in Greece by the EU. It was cuts to maintenance, cuts to staff and cuts to equipment that caused that. And it wasn't too long ago, within our living memory, the Stonehaven disaster took the lives of our own comrades from the RMT. So it's imperative that we give as much support, not just in the conference hall, to this motion, but to the RMT out there fighting the government and fighting the bosses. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Any other speakers on this one? If not, we'll move to the vote. Emergency Motion 2, cuts to railway infrastructure, jobs and services in Scotland. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Any abstentions? That motion is carried. We now move to Emergency Motion number 3 on Channel 4, to be moved by Prospect.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Congress. Mike Collier-Prickett, Prospect Union. Scotland, along with the other nations and regions of the UK, have been responsible for creating some of the most widely seen television in the last decade across the world. Producers from across the world have put their faith in Scottish crews to make their content, and our crew consistently achieve their set goals on time and on budget. We should be very proud of the talented crews that make up the creative sector in Scotland, both those that are homegrown and those that have settled here. When it comes to the UK productions, it is often a different atmosphere, one where crew are often undervalued, with heads of department being sought from elsewhere and often bringing their crews with them. Since 2004, public service broadcasters have been obliged to create a portion of their work outside of London and a portion outside of England. In 2020, the outside of England quota was raised to 9%. The combined screen agencies of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are united in their call to increase the outside England quota to the proportional level of 16%, introduce individual quotas for each nation in line with those accepted by the BBC since 2009. We are therefore very disappointed to hear that Channel 4 have pushed back on any idea that the nation's quota be raised to a proportional level, claiming, contrary to their boast that outside London production levels sit voluntarily above 50%, that in fact 9% for the nations is too difficult to meet. We have been even more disappointed that Ofcom have acquiesced to Channel 4's request to freeze the quotas for the upcoming 10 years. In moving this emergency motion, we are asking you all to show the pride and support you have for the creative workers in Scotland. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder speaker? Thank you.
Bedland Musicians Union seconding this particular motion. We are very proud in the Musicians Union to be supporting this emergency motion, because it was only this time last year that the BBC attempted to bring in such cost-saving measures like reducing the various different jobs, like cutting the BBC singers entirely. And it was only thanks to the support from all the cultural workers unions like BEC2, like Equity and so on, fighting together, that we were able to send the BBC running and avoiding taking the cuts and making sure our orchestra stayed under public control. And so this is a very important motion that we need to be backing. Much like I mentioned with the Export Office, we need to have things in place to make sure that Scottish talent has its place to be able to be promoted and celebrated. The fact that the stats in here shows not only how biased it is outside of Scotland in relation to just being London, the fact that you're trying to get regional accents in Channel 4 seems to be increasingly difficult as well. So there is a real desperate need for us to be supporting these things to make sure that we can make sure our televisions and our shows are actually reflective of the whole of British society. There's all of this talk about making sure we are a nice and inclusive society, but if everything is only stuck in London, it is going to be completely irrelevant to many people across Britain. So please support this emergency motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have another speaker?
Simon Barrow, NUJ. The NUJ is proud to support this motion in solidarity with our partner creative unions, and let's name them: Back2 Prospect, Equity, the Musicians Union, the Scottish Artists Union, the Society of Authors, the Scottish Society of Playwrights, and the Writers' Guild of Great Britain. This is a straightforward issue. A publicly owned public service broadcaster funded commercially by viewers across these islands, that's you and me as well, should deliver its remit in a way that benefits all its nations and regions. This is not, as you've heard, happening with Channel 4. Job opportunities and access to culture are suffering as a result, so are our creative industries and the workers in them. To coin a phrase, Scotland demands better. Public service broadcasting is the bedrock of Scotland's creative economy. Ofcom must ensure production that reflects Scotland's share of the UK population as part of Channel 4's 10-year licence. Thank you to the STUC for supporting, working with and enabling our union's joint pressure. We'll keep it up. Please support this motion.
Thank you, Delegate. I see no other speakers. So we move to the vote on Emergency Motion 3, Channel 4. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Can I see any against? Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. We now move to Emergency Motion number 4, Missing Millions, to be moved by unison.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Congress. Audrey McCabe, Unison, social care worker. Forgot to mention the other day, first time delegate, but now would have a hand to be speaking. So I don't have no other time for that. Where are the missing millions? I'm just going to ask Lillian to have a look under that desk to see if whom's I left it there yesterday. No. Right, so what you may ask are the missing millions. Initially, 70 million was put by for the whole budget for National Care Service and Fair Work and Care. In addition, 30 million was also secured by the members of Work Stream for Fair Work and Care Terms and Conditions. This was agreed at the end of 2022, and the plan was to implement sick pay, maternity and paternity pay. In September 2023, this money was then pooled without consultation with the Work Stream members, employers and councils. This was confirmed by a Freedom of Information request to Scottish Government. Excuse me. Only on Monday, I mentioned how Scottish Government like to talk and talk and talk. However, we are met with a deafening silence as to where the missing millions have gone. There are charities within the voluntary sector who, constrained by funding, are at least trying to implement fair work. And my own employer, for instance, are following a recent pay claim, looking to increase employee sickness benefits, albeit dependent on ballot of our members. In sharp contrast to this, I heard only yesterday of a social care employer in the Stranraer area offering to pay 30p over the poverty living wage. 30p over the poverty living wage of £12 an hour. But, and it's a big but, only if workers agree to sign a new contract which takes away their right to sick pay. And only this week we heard of members in tears as they are so ill but cannot afford to stay off work. But their dilemma is they cannot afford to go into work and risk the health of the vulnerable members they support, vulnerable people they support. We also hear of members being disciplined due to being off sick. I would also argue that for many long-term workers in social care, many have work-related ill health, particular to musculoskeletal disorders, through years of now long gone poor moving and handling practice. But let's go back to where the money goes. Let's look at 20% profit that private providers have accumulated. In 21-22, this amounted to over £216 million of our public funds going into shareholders' pockets. And also the public funding given to those unscrupulous employers, such as the Richmond Fellowship, who are not a fair work employer and refuse to recognise trade unions. Currently, they are sitting on £58 million in reserves. 3 years after promising to improve pay and conditions, we find these promises broken yet again to me and every other care worker. On April 25th, Unison will join our sister unions in the STUC, Unite and GMB, to take our fight to the Scottish Government. We demand to know where the missing millions have gone and to restore the 38 million for terms and conditions. We demand a commitment to deliver a timescale and funds for sectoral bargaining, and we demand that Scottish Government deliver £15 per hour for care workers now. Please support the move. Thank you.
Thank you, comrades. Can I call on Unite to second?
President Congress John Gillespie, Unite, seconding the emergency motion 4 on missing millions. Congress, the STUC Fair Care Group, comprising the Unite, Unison and the GMB, have been over the last year all been campaigning collectively on key issues for social care staff, mainly to improve pay and terms and conditions. Congress, since COVID has exposed the precarious state of social care, the unions have also been campaigning, particularly to expose the private sector, where the profiteers have neglected to pay their workers decent sick pay, paternity and maternity pay. The mixed economy and care has exposed a world of difference in pay and terms and conditions, depending on where you work, whether it be the NHS, local authority, not-for-profit and the private sector. No prizes for guessing who was the worst. Congress, the Terms and Conditions work stream set up by the Scottish Government, allocated some £38 million to improve sick pay, paternity and maternity pay, as the start of a sectoral bargaining pathway, which is currently being discussed with the unions, employers and the Scottish Government. It's an absolute outrage and disgrace, therefore, that all the hard work and campaigning by the unions, the Scottish Government has decided to remove the money without it as such as a by your leave. Totally disgraceful and disrespectful, as far as I'm concerned, the unions are concerned. In a sector that is so desperate for resources, where staff shortages, zero contracts and a blatant profiteering by private companies is rife, the Scottish Government has chosen to raid the already poor coffers for care. So, comrades, we have a message to the Scottish Government. We want our missing millions back, and we want more back now. The unions will be there in force to demonstrate the collective strength and solidarity, like the mover said, on the 25th of April, 11 o'clock outside Holyrood, and we would urge you all to join us all to name and shame the Scottish Government to give us our missing millions back and give the heroic care workers what they deserve. They deserve £15 an hour and sectoral bargaining now. Congress, I second. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Can I ask the GMB to support, please?
Tamara Beattie, GMB Scotland, supporting the emergency motion for missing millions. Congress, today I stand before you not just as a rep, but as a care worker who's frustrated and had enough. The recent £38 million designated to improve the terms and conditions of care workers has just vanished into thin air, and it is nothing short of betrayal and broken promises by the government. After COVID, care workers were promised that the care sector was going to change and that there was going to be an improvement and that we were going to be given an effective voice. That money was allocated to provide better sick pay, better maternity pay and better paternity pay. It was withdrawn without any consultation and we were told it is no longer available with no answers. So where is our effective voice? Where's the money gone? Well, your guess is as good as mine. The withdrawal of this funding isn't just a financial blow to the care sector, it's a slap in the face to every care worker who puts their heart and soul into what they do. We were on the front lines during COVID, caring for the most vulnerable in society, and we sacrificed times with our families, and we still do it because we care, and we love the people that we look after. But yet again, we're disrespected, undervalued, underappreciated, and at the bottom of the priority list. We refuse to accept this, we refuse to stay silent, and we refuse to be forgotten. This is why we must stand united in our demand for the return of the missing millions. We call upon Congress to stand with care workers and to advocate for us and hold the Scottish Government accountable. We demand transparency and genuine commitment to improving the terms and conditions of care workers across Scotland. So join us on the 25th of April outside Holyrood when we stand united together. Please support this motion.
Thank you, Delegate. I see no other speakers. We'll move to the vote on emergency motion number 4, missing millions. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Can I see all those against? Thank you. Can I see any abstentions? It's carried. And can I see all those who will be outside the Scottish Parliament at 11 a.m. on the 25th of April? Thank you. We now move on to emergency motion number 5, living rent, to be moved by unison.
Eilish O'Keefe, Unison Moving Emergency Motion 5. In September 2022, the Scottish Government introduced an emergency rent freeze on rent increases and evictions. In April last year, this changed to a rent cap of 3%. As of this month, landlords will be able to issue rent increases to tenants. And there is no legal limit to these increases, although tenants can apply for rent adjudication through Rent Service Scotland, which will cap increases at 12%. However, this limit will only apply to tenants who go through the adjudication process, putting the onus on tenants who may not have the knowledge of such protections to fight unfair rent increases. Congress, while the Scottish Government has ended the emergency protections for renters, the emergency facing us hasn't. In Unison's housing report, published last year, we heard the horrific impact high housing costs have on our members. Nearly 60% of surveyed members spend 40% or more of their income on housing. We've heard of members having to go without basic necessities such as sanitary products, of parents going without food to ensure they can feed their children, and members scared to put on their heating or use their shower due to the costs. Any increase to our already unsustainable rents will only push more tenants into destitution, and these stories will only become more common. The housing bill published by the Scottish Government last month is welcome, but it requires improvements to ensure it holds landlords accountable and protects tenants. Comrades, worker struggles and tenant struggles are intrinsically linked, with those in precarious work more likely to be in precarious housing. We need the support of our trade union movement as we stand against the practices of greedy landlords who exploit our right to safe, affordable housing for profit. Congress, please support Living Rent and the vital work they do and support the motion. I move.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have a seconder?
President Congress, Josh Morris on behalf of the STC Youth Conference. I'd like to ask the President if I can be a wee bit cheeky. In my speech yesterday, I asked you all to affiliate to Living Rent. Who's all sent on the email to their branch asking to affiliate? One, brilliant, fabulous. So, action point for you all, get the email sent, get the WhatsApp sent, and affiliate to Living Rent. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. I suppose before the vote, I should declare an interest as a member of Living Rent. But we will now move to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thanks very much indeed. We now move to Emergency Motion 6, Education Cuts Emergency in Glasgow, to be moved by the EIS.
President, colleagues, Susan Quinn, EIS, and a head teacher in Glasgow schools. I've worked in Glasgow for 35 years, and the situation we find ourselves in this year is the worst I can recall, and I've said that on a number of years, particularly over the last 10 years, where we have had continuous cuts to education and continuous cuts to Glasgow public services. But the cuts that are being proposed that have been passed this year and are part of a 3-year budget will result in 172 teacher posts being deleted as of August this year. There's no doubt that that's happening because my head teacher colleagues are implementing that as I stand here, because that's what they've been directed to do, and the staffing formula has been changed to reflect that. My school goes from having 9.3 teachers to 8.8 in August. 8.8 teachers, colleagues, for 7 classes. I need 7.8 teachers to deliver those classes, which leaves us with 1, and that'll be me. And that means that only me will be available out of class on any day that everybody else is present. Anybody else is absent, I'll be in covering the class. And the things that will be lost around that, colleagues, means that those teachers who would normally be doing early years transition meetings at this point in the year to see our new primary one supported into school won't be able to do it. Staff will have more difficulty in supporting young people with additional support needs directly in the actual support work, but also in terms of assessing their need to get the diagnosis that they require to get them any additional support. Staff will find it difficult to support newly qualified teachers, but that will not really matter because none of the newly qualified teachers are going to get work in Glasgow. And they will have it difficulty in absence cover. I will be the absence cover in that school. Over the 3 years of the budget that has been passed, 450 teachers will be deleted from our thing. That's between 8 and 9% of the teaching workforce, colleagues. That's on the backdrop of Scottish Government having a commitment to us closing the poverty-related attainment gap and saying that they were going to increase the number of teachers employed in Scotland by 3,500. Glasgow have already lost 125 teachers this year, colleagues, as a result of a budget decision last year. We are in crisis in Glasgow. If it's allowed to happen in Glasgow, it will happen everywhere else. Please support us in taking our dispute forward and getting this budget decision reversed.
Thank you, Delegate. Can I call on the seconder?
Congress President Mike Corbett, NASUWT, seconding Emergency Motion 6. Colleagues, comrades, been a long shift. We're almost there, but forgive me for being a bit confused. Yes, I had a few glasses of wine at the education reception on Monday evening, but that does not explain why the Scottish Government claims that extra money has been given to councils to increase teacher numbers, while Glasgow City Council's threatening to get rid of teachers. Now, I'm no auditor, I might be minted if I was, but can someone please conduct an audit and explain to us all how that massive contradiction can exist? Here's some money to employ more teachers, abracadabra, we need to get rid of some teachers. It just does not add up. I did have a one-to-one discussion with the Cabinet Secretary for Education about this about 3 weeks ago, but other than saying that fining councils for failing to maintain teachers' numbers would be politically difficult, she wasn't much help. To be fair, Glasgow City Council have not been much help either. They suggest that, oh, the teacher trade unions have been consulted and will continue to be consulted throughout this process. But their idea of consultation seems to be, hey, unions, we've got a big budget problem. What are we going to cut to solve it? So their consultation, as many are, is an absolute sham. And the most important thing to consider here is the impact of these cuts, when we should actually be increasing teacher numbers. It has been widely accepted, in fact recommended, that the impact of the pandemic means more teaching staff are needed for dedicated one-to-one work with kids, for small group work with kids, and reducing rather than increasing teacher numbers will mean less support for pupils who've struggled in school post-pandemic. It will negatively impact attainment and it will increase already crippling workload for teachers. In no way can cuts to teacher numbers make education better. They must be challenged, they must be resisted. Please support this motion.
Thank you, Mike. Another supporting speaker.
Ben Lunn, Musicians Union, speaking in support of this motion, and I promise this is the last time you'll hear from me today. As my fellow MU delegate, Christy, in her debut speech to Congress yesterday, highlighted the vital role of music education, it is no surprise that the MU has a vested interest in this motion and are going to do everything we can to support this. The cuts to education are ultimately just a message of doom for our bairns, more than anything else, because ultimately what education does is it opens up opportunities for kids to go on and do other things. If they are from birth being told there's nothing you can do, what message is that sending to our bairns from working class communities? It is only going to be feelings of doom, neglect, and just ultimately despair, which is something we as the working class cannot allow that feeling to fester in any way. I am also the secretary of an organisation called the Workers' Music Association, which was set up for the sole purpose of making sure that working class people can have access to music in all its forms. And back in 1946, in a wonderful document called Music in Post-War Britain, it said, education is a seed from which to grow. That is ultimately the core of why we need to be defending education. It allows us to nourish ourselves, to enrich ourselves and expand what we can do. Our bairns need access to learning. Don't let Glasgow Council rob our children of that future. Support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I see no further speakers, so we'll be moving to the vote on emergency motion number 6, Education Cuts Emergency in Glasgow. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. All those against? And any abstentions? That is carried unanimously. We now move to emergency motion 7, Solidarity with Dr. Ghazan Abu Sittar, to be moved by the STUC Youth Conference.
President, Congress, Colm McHale, STUC Youth Conference. I think this is a particular